Hello everyone, today I'm going to look at this Zyxel Multy M1 AX1800 Wi-Fi 6 whole home, or otherwise usually called wireless mesh system. This is the 3-pack version, which seems to come with 2 in one box and then an additional add-on one. There's the side of the box, more specs. Up to 600 megabits per second on 2.4 gigahertz and up to 1200 megabits per second, so 1200 or 1.2 gigabits ish on the 5 gigahertz. VPN secured remote access, I'm not sure about that. I don't remember seeing that when I went through the web interface, but or the app, we can have a look at that later on in the video anyway. And you've got Alexa control if you need to. Pack of 3, Ethernet cable, power cord, blah blah blah. Other things on the box, stuff in other languages, and some more sales stuff on the back. I will say I've ordered 3 kits of these, and all 3, 2 of which are from one supplier and 1 was from another supplier, so 2 came from BT Shop, which I think is now called EE Store, and another one came from eBuyer. They've all had this seal tape open on the box, which is interesting. However, I don't think they're returned ones or anything. I think they must be opening them up probably to replace a European power supply with a UK power supply. Lead is my best guess on that one. So we'll take out the first of the boxes, that's the additional, and then you have the 2-pack. Boxes of those, pretty much the same, designed to be mounted anywhere, which is interesting, and you manage it using the Multi app, which we'll go through later on in the video. And on the side there should be the same details which are on the outer box that it all came with. Once you open up the packaging, you've got some manuals, so you've got a warranty card, which we can ignore. You've got probably some safety information with some very small text, which we can probably also ignore. Oh yeah, it is safety warnings. So here's the manual. If you do want to read it, please pause the video, because I'm just going to scan over it very quickly, and if you need to read something, use the pause button on the video. While I'm doing that, be aware this is a video made by Free Name on YouTube. If somebody else has posted this video, I would be pleased if you would let me know. This bit's probably interesting for some, which is the LED indicators and what they mean and what colours they are. That's the manual out of the way. Quite comprehensive really compared to some devices. It comes with a wall mount bracket. So if you wanted to screw that to the wall and then sit the Multi on it, comes with one of those. Comes with what I assume is why they open these, to put in a UK power supply. It is 12 volts out, 1.5 amps, and plus, like normal, is on the centre pin. And the plug that goes into the unit looks like that. Comes with a flat Ethernet cable with all of the pins actually filled in, unlike some of the Internet of Things devices you get. Comes with a wall plug or rule plug and the screws for the wall mount and the device itself. Underneath we've probably got exactly the same again for the second one of the pair. So looking at the router, you've got the big status light there. See if I can make sure this is focused. You've got the WPS, or the pairing or connect button. On the back you've got a big LED on and off button. Very strange how huge that thing is. You have a WAN/LAN port, LAN 3, LAN 2 and LAN 1 where the power goes in, and the factory reset hole on the top. It's got some vents. On the underside of the unit you have the sticker showing the wireless details and a QR code to connect, some vents, and just all the other standard stickery stuff that you get. The default IP address is 192.168.212.1. Each of the devices, even if they come in the same box, have different details on the underside. So the one that you set up first becomes the master one, which the rest of them will take their details from. And if I look at the final one, that will have yet another unique password, which it does. So actually, none of them, even if they're in the same box, have the same details, which is unusual for a wireless mesh system, because it's going to make it quite confusing if somebody picks up one of the secondary or the satellites and tries to connect using those details. Let's plug this in and see what it does. I'm going to turn the Multi on now, so that's now on at the power switch, and we'll see what this does if the cat stops moving my camera around. Yes, okay, thank you very much. It's not particularly good colour rendition on the camera, but that is flashing a teal colour, or maybe a very light blue, maybe verging on jade green colour. Bearing in mind I actually don't have this plugged into the internet yet, so let me do that. But it definitely will not have booted by this point anyway. If this has already been helpful to you, it would be really helpful to me if you wouldn't mind subscribing to my YouTube channel. You don't need to have the notifications switched on, but the subscriber numbers really do help. So interestingly, that's all it seems to do. I would have expected in its default configuration to have done something more than that. So what I'm going to do next is I'll set up this camera and record the app and the setup of this device. Ah, no, as I say that, it finally goes green. Solid, kind of teal green. I do wonder, what do they refer to that colour as in the manual? They refer to this as, oh, interesting, yeah, lake green. Very fancy word they call it. So I presume if I get my phone and connect to this device's Wi-Fi, it will work as a single standard routing mode wireless device. Let's give this a go. And it's connected to device but cannot provide internet, so it doesn't act as a single standard routing mode device, even though I am plugged into the WAN/LAN 4 port. So it's not passing through to my normal network, nor is it doing routing through to the internet on a standard dynamic IP connection. So yes, as I was saying before this light went solid, I'll set up this camera and my phone and I'll go through using the Multi app. Here goes on the mobile side of things and the initial setup of these routers. I'm just going to search for Multi. Zyxel Multy was one of the answers. Zyxel Multy, and that's a cat standing in front of the camera. And it's installed. So let's open the app. Lots of pop-ups already. I don't really want notifications. It can use Bluetooth. And I am going to skip the account sign up and just see if I can install a multi-device. So we've got the Multi M1s, which is weirdly a side-on shot, which is not what I would associate with that device, but there we go. Choose any one of the multis to serve as your router, which I've done, plugged it in. Make sure your multi is connected to the modem. Wait for 2 minutes until the light is lake green, which it did eventually go solid lake green. And that's a little bit tedious because my phone is resting on the multi and it wants to scan. So let's see if I can do that. Hey, there we go. Join the network. That's a bit washed out on the screen, sorry about that. Would you like it to allow it to find devices, which I will need to get it to communicate with it properly. Make sure you've connected your modem into the WAN LAN port, which I have. In my case, the internet that the multi will see is actually my main network, so it will be double netted initially, or I'll look and see if I can put it in bridge mode, which will also be interesting for people to see. This is now changed to flashing green, and let's remind myself what flashing green means on their manual. Flashing green is app setup is in progress, which indeed it is. What should we call this one? Study. It's an interesting thing, it was lake green, which means the device is fully started, but you can have red as a solid on, which is saying it didn't have internet access. So it's interesting that that was showing lake green, but I couldn't get internet on my other mobile phone. But there we go. First multi is up and running. Do I want to add another multi? Yes, let's do that now. There's a second multi, and there is a second multi plugged in and booting, so we'll see what that does. You can see the difference here between lake green, which must be blue and green combined, and over here the actual full green colour. As I showed you earlier, there is a switch on the back which turns the light on and off. Although interestingly, when I had plugged this in, that switch was set to out or off, and yet the light was still on. It was only when I toggled it in and then out again that the light went off. So it may be that, for that switch to take effect, you have to do it once per power cycle or power boot, or maybe in the setup mode it overrides that switch, which is interesting because I would have expected the switch to be possibly a physical switch in between the LEDs and the device, but obviously not. So we want to do add a multi. It's going to ask me through plugging it in. So you get the other multi, which I've got, and prepare the power adapter and the other multi. Plug in the multi and wait until the light is solid lake green, which it's not, it's still flashing. Probably will be flashing for quite some time. And that's now gone solid lake green, so I'm going to press that button. Press the sync button on the front of your multi-satellite until the LED blinks pink. So I'm going to hold that down until it blinks pink, which it is now. And that is now, has triggered the WPS, or the pairing process, of this main router multi. That one's gone solid green again, and that one's still flashing green, which presumably means it's doing the initial connection process. So green blinking, the app setup is in progress. No, I am done. And it looks like it forces a firmware upgrade, so let's do that. That might take quite some time, so I suspect I'll be forwarding through on this part of the video, but at least you'll see what the lights do if they do anything. So supposedly, if they are yellow and on, so these lights at the front, solid on, the device should be upgrading its firmware, so interesting to see whether it does that. It's difficult to tell, but potentially that could be considered yellow. It's certainly not as consistently green as the one on the left. I wouldn't really call that a very clear yellow. I guess that must be what they call yellow, because they've both rebooted at the same time and must have completed a firmware update. They definitely don't lie when they say it can take 5 minutes. I think that has been 5 minutes or possibly even longer. The satellite seems to have booted up and been ready first. And the one on the right, which is the main router, appears to still be booting up. I may be stuck on that screen until I go into the wireless settings and tell it to connect back to the multis, which I'm going to do now. So if you're setting this up and you don't already have Wi-Fi in the building, this wouldn't be an issue. But if you already have a Wi-Fi point that you haven't switched off while you're setting these up, I suspect you're going to have this problem as well. As I thought, it did need to be forced back. So you can configure your wireless name and password. I'm going to leave them defaults. And now we are at the basic front screen of the Multi app. So what can we do within this? We've got the home thing, which shows the two multis that I've got. It hasn't named my other multi. It's something I would like to do. Let's call that one left side, for the left side multi. Hasn't changed its name there. There we go. It has now. And there's one device connected, which is this mobile phone. Hasn't picked up the name of the phone, which is interesting. So I'm going to go through these in more detail and in more structure now. So we're on the front screen. Let's start with the cog for My Home. And it shows you the multis that you have in your house. You can set a photo of your house for some reason. I think that's probably about 2 times the size of my house, going by that photo of just the living room. I'm going to press on the primary multi. It gives the details and where you can rename the multi, the firmware version, IPv6. It should have an IPv6 address, I would hope, although it's off by default. Let's turn that on. I assume that must be rebooting because that one's gone red, which means that this one has lost its access to satellite. Can't connect to the main router. So this thing must have triggered a reboot, during which time this will not be able to access the mesh network. So it's reconnected to a wireless network. We may be in the same situation as the firmware update, where the telephone may have connected to my existing network rather than the multis, so I might need to go and manually swap that over. No, I didn't need to. It is connected to the multi. Let's go back into the settings, go into the primary one and into IPv6, and indeed it does have an IPv6 address now. Ethernet connection status shows what the ports are doing, and it's only got one thing connected, and it also shows the speed, which is quite nice. And we can restart or delete the multi. If I go over to the satellite, IPv6 will be interesting. Yep, it's also picked up IPv6 through the main one. Backhaul should say that it has stunning signal. And move it further because yes, it is right next to it. And we can restart and delete the multi if we were going to reuse it or rejoin it. We've got a speed test, which will be interesting to see how accurate this is. I have gigabit internet, and it should be able to achieve through my router, which is not very good, and is the limit of my gigabit internet. Should be able to get about 600 megabits per second. So it seems like it's achieving 500, which probably within the realms of plausibility. The problem I've got is I have a gigabit into the building, and I am using a router which does not have the CPU power to cope with more than about 600 megabits per second throughput. But it's a router that I want to use, has the software on it that I want and the features that I want. So sadly, I'm stuck with that for the moment, but 600 megabits per second is barely any different to a full gigabit. So that's just as a speed test, and I guess it keeps the history of different speed tests that you've done. Under the wireless section, it shows you what wireless networks are enabled, and you'll be able to show the password or edit the wireless name. I do wonder what this little icon here does. I'm going to press it and see. Gives a QR code to connect, and the edit should let you edit the name and the password. A little European symbol in the top right lets you set the country code, which might change some of the available channels or possibly the transmit power. Bottom right looked like it was to do with device management and when people are allowed to access the internet or suspending internet access for some devices, or with these in router mode, which they are, or this main one is at the moment, you can reserve or always give the same IP address to that same MAC address. So you can do blocking of the internet at certain times, and you can just block internet access for a specific amount of time. So let's try setting up a block of the internet, for example overnight. Profile name sleep time, but you could say call that homework time, or some other thing that you wouldn't want somebody using the internet. So for sleep time we would want, but it's interesting that you can get nice 15-minute granular control on that as well. So this is a profile which you can then assign to devices, so you don't have to do this for every single device that you wanted to be blocked at that particular time. Go watch out for that. The very blue clear button, which you would expect to be the save button, is a clear button. It's this nondescript done button in the top right to save that. So you could fill this in with a nice pattern of all the times that you wanted to block, then click on clear and get very annoyed because you've just wiped it all out. It would be frustrating if this reboots just to save that change. Good, yeah, that's come back quicker than I thought, so I don't think that will drop out, which is good. It really did take a long time. I was wondering whether me blocking this device after 9 PM, which it is now, would stop it accessing the admin page, but it just looks like it takes a very long time. So blocked until 7 AM tomorrow, and it looks like you can do a quick allow and allow somebody access to, well, for the rest of the time profile. Devices assigned to the profile, and there we are. If we go back to the main screen, it shows it's currently blocked for that, for sleepy time. But if I take it out of the schedule, you can assign a profile, but how do you remove a profile? Maybe you have to go into the profile and then delete the device? Yes, okay. So you can assign a profile, but to remove a device from it, you have to go into the profile, find the device in the list, which is difficult when some of them don't have names, and then click on the remove button. Tell you what might solve this. So turning off private Wi-Fi address should mean that the Zyxels will see me as a different device. So therefore I should no longer be blocked. Yeah, I can get to a website. Does that mean I can now use the administrative app? Because if you block yourself, the device you're using to administer, yeah, oh wow, that is ridiculous. So I'd set a schedule, as you saw over here, sleep time, for this device that has the administrating app on it, and then I am unable to make changes to the router's configuration after that time. And then that removes it immediately. So that's why it took so long to add and attempt to remove settings, because once you block internet access, even though you're connecting from this to administer it, it still breaks something to do with the communication. That's absolutely insane. What a ridiculous design flaw. Anyway, Going into the menu in the top left, we have network map. Let's have a look at that. We've got the internet, and it just shows where the devices are. If you had them daisy chained off of each other, so doing little Wi-Fi hops to, say, one that's even further away, you'd see it on here, or if they were both connecting back to the main one, you would see that there. We can add a multi, which will go through probably the same settings that we saw during the initial setup. Add multi to my home, and that's the same stuff we saw during the setup wizard anyway. Diagnose. It just seems to do speed tests from each of the devices. What's the little schedule? No, that's history, result history, okay. Wi-Fi signal. That should be way up here, yep, because we're right next to the device. The iPhone won't provide this info, so I assume it's going off to the multi-devices to get the reception levels to then report it or show it in the app. Web configurator. This is what asked me to log in. Set a local password. Yes, please. That means that using another machine without the app, I should be able to log in to the web admin pages. I might do that on another computer later on in this video. Under settings, we've got port forwarding on or off, and adding in port forwards. That assumes that you're using this in routing mode and you're not double natted. So you can add a service name, SMTP, port 25 through to port 25, TCP only. How do I hide the keyboard? Choose a device, and then which device you want to send it through to. Select done. I'd say that's an unreasonable amount of time to apply a port forward, but we might have got there. Yes, we did get there. And you can add another one in the top right, or if we go into that, we can edit it or delete. You can turn on UPnP or also see what stuff has been automatically port forwarded using UPnP. DMZ, which basically port forwards every single port through to a device. That's generally a bad idea unless you know why you're doing it. Ideally, you want to look up and be sure what ports you need to forward rather than using DMZ, which is like a blanket, really silly way around not knowing what ports you need to port forward. We've got NAT mode, or you can move it into bridge mode, which means that these things will just be wireless access points. Most people will probably want to use it in bridge mode unless you are using parental control. Well, that's basically it, because the reserve IP, the port forwarding and the DMZ and the UPnP you should be able to do through your normal broadband router anyway. So you would normally want to use bridge mode unless you just had a modem and you didn't already have a competent router. Notifications are switched off, so I can't go into that. And advanced settings, you can turn off and on the SIP ALG, which is the application layer gateway. It's quite likely to break SIP and some other things, so I would probably recommend switching that off, or if you find that you have any issues with VoIP, then switch back on again. And we're near the end of all the useful stuff in this app. we've got join my Zyxel cloud, which I definitely don't want to do, because who wants to give companies more information than they really need? And information, we've got what looks like an event log. Pretty competent. So there we go, that is the app of this Zyxel Multi. If this has already been helpful to you, it would be really helpful to me if you wouldn't mind subscribing to my YouTube channel. You don't need to have the notifications switched on, but the subscriber numbers really do help. Thank you very much. And now I've set the local admin password in the web configurator section. I will have another section showing the web configuration on this thing as well. Alright, I've moved over to a computer, and I must apologise for anyone who has headphones in or very good speakers. Just before I recorded this section, it looks like they've started to do some construction work outside. So you're probably going to hear a lot of low rumbles from trucks and other things going on in the road. So apparently you can get to it using the web admin interface using zyxelwifi.com, which indeed you can, but I should also be able to get to it using the IP address of the default gateway. Welcome to the web configurator, and I do need to click past the automatic HTTPS. Earlier, it only offered me my Zyxel cloud, which I haven't created an account for, and I will refuse to create an account for. So I need to go log in with local password, and in the app I set that local password. And here we have the web admin status page, which to me looks nicer than the app and easier. Certainly more information on the screen than the app has. Weirdly, we've got two blank boxes there, but I guess it balances out the space, and shows you the network port status, CPU and memory usage, which I don't think the app showed. At least I don't remember the app showing. We can add a satellite without having to use the web admin interface, which is pretty good. And you can also add other devices using this. So if you've got a printer or something and you wanted to trigger the WPS button without having to physically go to your router or one of your multi-points, you can trigger it via this page here. That actually just jumped me over to the Wi-Fi Settings WPS tab, so we'll come back to that in a minute. Cancel button doesn't seem to do anything. Let's go back to overview. So you've got an easy toggle for Wi-Fi off and on there, and you've got the okay, that's what those other buttons on the or boxes on the right hand side must be. Over here must be for each of the schedules. If you've got multiple schedules like sleep time here, you could have homework time there, so that's what those are for. Let's move on to Diagnose, which I think will just be the same thing we saw in the app, which is speeds and speed test history. Parental controls, pretty much the same as in the app. So look in the bookmarks for going back to the app. Under mesh, weirdly I would expect to see the one that's called left. So something's a little bit wonky there. Let's refresh that page. Yeah, oh, and there we go. The page just was broken. So that's good. We can go into more, and again, similar to the app, we can delete it, rename it, or not factory reset it, but restart it. Something that isn't exposed in the app is the OpenVPN Server and the OpenVPN Client, which looks like you would be able to bridge two networks using OpenVPN, or possibly allow people to OpenVPN into your network using the OpenVPN software on their computer. Very Very interesting. In fact, and it routes it, you can have it split routing. So you can have the 2.4 gigahertz going out of your main internet, but the 5 gigahertz and the LAN going out of the OpenVPN connection. So that's quite a capable and interesting feature to have built into these mesh devices or routers. So a VPN server and a VPN client. Under settings we have internet, which I don't think I noticed as being an option on the app. So if you needed to set up PPPoE or some other way of connecting to the internet, I do not remember seeing that as an option in the app. Let me have another quick look. No. Ha! Interesting. So the web admin interface definitely gives you a whole lot more information and settings for the internet side. So we've got IP over Ethernet, which is basically a network connection, or PPPoE, where you have a username and password to connect to the internet. IPv4 can be automatic or static. You can set the MTU, which is definitely not a setting which I saw within the app. And you can also set the DNS servers, which again I couldn't see as a setting in the app. IPv6, different methods of obtaining or setting an IP address. You can even clone the MAC address of the routers on the WAN port, which is interesting. And it can auto steer itself away from having an IP address conflict if the IP of the WAN matches the LAN. Interesting. Under NAT and port forwarding, this is probably very similar to the the app. NAT enable or disable. In fact, that wasn't in the app, so that's more helpful anyway. Server setup. Not really sure what that means for the server setup. Might be what they call, what might actually be DMZ. I'll have to give that a go later. If there's anything interesting about this server setup, I'll either put it in the description of the video or I'll add a section at the end of the video. Pass through and not really sure. Okay, this must pass. Okay, I don't know why it's called pass through and then it's got ALG at the top. So application layer gateways, which try and help other protocols through the router. You can enable and disable here, and VPN helpers or pass through you can also enable or disable there. It supports dynamic DNS, which again isn't in the app, so there's a whole load of stuff you can do within this web interface which you can't do within the app. Supports no IP and several others. So dyndns isn't free, no IP is free at the moment still, and these other ones I don't know. So that's if you have a dynamic IP address and you want to always be able to get to your router, then you can configure a dynamic DNS provider, and the router will always update that DNS name to point to your dynamic IP address each time it changes. Enable or disable UPnP, and it's nice that it shows you what ports are forwarded by other devices automatically. Moving on to settings and then Wi-Fi. Something again, a load of stuff not exposed in the app, I don't think. The channel and the bandwidth, and certainly a load of advanced settings which weren't in there as well, like MU-MIMO, which some people may wish to change. Enabling and disabling guest Wi-Fi, that was definitely in the app, so that's nothing new in here. Enabling and disabling the WPS button, triggering the WPS button, which we'd also use to add an additional mesh point if you needed to, and then scheduling, which we saw through the app. No, sorry, this is scheduling for Wi-Fi transmission rather than specific devices having access to the internet. Moving on to settings and then LAN. This is where you'll be able to change the LAN IP address of the router and the subnet mask. enable or disable its DHCP server, set what DNS servers it gives to clients. So if you wanted to change DNS, you'd actually do that, say to OpenDNS or something, you'd do that within the internet settings. But if you had, and then your clients would still connect to the multi, and then the multi would go and do that DNS lookup. If you've got your own DNS server within your LAN, so you have a Pi-hole or a Active Directory server, then this is where you'd want to change it to a user-defined DNS server of your internal DNS custom server. IPv6 should be very much the same, to do with how it hands out IPs to, or how it gets an IP address, how it hands out IP addresses and routing announcements to IPv6 clients on your network. Settings and then firewall. Respond to pings. Oof, by default it doesn't respond on the WAN. I find that really frustrating. So WAN and LAN. Enable firewall, enabled or disabled. Firewall rules, blah blah blah. And apply that. IPv6 firewall hopefully will drop everything by default, which it does. So if you had a client, an IPv6 client in your network, which by default, because of the way IPv6 usually works, is publicly accessible, this router will block any inbound access to that device unless you explicitly allow the port through to that device in your network, which is the most secure default way to have it. Because if you didn't realize that IPv6 was enabled and it was running a mail server or a CCTV server or something, and then somebody discovered it over IPv6, if you don't explicitly add the allow in this IPv6 firewall section, then that accidental service will never be discoverable, which is good. And then moving on to the final one, which is under settings and then system, we've got status about the uptime and other things, its WAN information and LAN information, MAC addresses and IPv6 addresses. General settings, we should probably have time zone, I would have thought, and how quickly it logs you out of the admin interface. No time zone, that must be somewhere else. Remote access, which will be if you want to allow people to administer it over the internet. Maintenance, which will be firmware updates, reboots and factory reset. Operating mode. Standard mode, it is a router, or bridge mode, which means you're basically going to use these mesh points as an access point only. And under logs, I think we saw that in the app, but it showed it in a very friendly way. This should hopefully just show a bunch of text that is very geeky. Oh no, it looks very similar actually. Not very much information available there. But at least it has some sort of log. And that's the end of the web admin interface. So it's very brief, not as featured as, for example, Zyxel's main router range, which definitely have a lot more settings, but it's also not too bad. And for the price of these things, it's quite amazing. So you get a pack of 3 for about £70 in the UK at the moment, which I think is the lowest cost Wi-Fi 6 mesh devices I've ever seen. What remains to be seen is how reliable they are. So I've got I'm going to have about 3 of them out with customers, and it'll be interesting to see how many grumbles I get over the next few months as to how reliable they are or not. Hopefully this video has been interesting to you and helpful. If it has, it would be really helpful to me if you wouldn't mind subscribing to my YouTube channel. You don't need to have the video notifications switched on, but the subscriber numbers really do help. Thanks very much.